Danielle Cheng. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Wirefire Solutions, Inc.
Hi, I'm Rossilyne. I'm the Cybersecurity Analyst of Wirefire.
We're here to talk to you today about getting smart with smart tech. And we're really thankful for our friends at BSides for organizing this event for 2021. Before we get into the topic, a little bit about Wirefire and who we are and why we're actually qualified to talk about this topic. Wirefire is an 8-year-old consulting firm located in Gastown, Vancouver. We're a group of consultants with engineering minds, and we are focused on secured networks, anything from advanced networking for mining to network segmentation for a medical environment. So, tell us a little bit more about getting smart with smart tech. What's going on here?
So the reason why we chose this topic is that as employees of a cybersecurity consulting firm, we frequently have meetings with organizations that have been hit by ransomware or experienced some sort of data breach. Mm-hmm. When we dig into those incidents, patterns emerge. Usually they have gaps in their network and they say things like, well, what's the big deal if I use TeamViewer to access my water treatment facility remotely? Or their staff are undertrained and they say things like, oh, I thought the email legitimately came from HR, so I clicked the link.
And they're getting very sophisticated too.
Exactly. And so regardless of why these organizations were unable to prioritize cybersecurity, the fact remains that the security posture of an organization depends heavily on the individuals that make up the organization itself. So if those bad cyber hygiene at home persists, then more often than not, they exist in the office too.
Okay, so in cybersecurity, we often talk about having a strong security program means the people, the process, and the technologies. Mm-hmm. So I'm following this. Okay.
Yeah, and we thought a good place to start is to address these gaps through cybersecurity awareness, right? Increasing awareness. But the challenge is cybersecurity is a very broad topic, so we've narrowed it down today to smart tech. Specifically, we'll be asking where and when do we use these smart tech? What kind of data do they collect? And if that data falls into the wrong hands, what's the potential consequence?
Okay, sounds exciting.
But before we actually start with the main part of the talk, let's make sure that we're on the same page with definitions. As in, what is smart tech? Sometimes they're referred to as smart devices or IoTs, short for Internet of Things. But what constitutes as smart tech? Let's use a simplified definition for the purposes of this talk and just say that if it ticks off two criteria, then they're smart tech. So they're connected to the internet and they can transmit data.
Okay, so like your TV or your Google Home devices or smart lighting even?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's a good segue, those examples you built, because smart tech falls into 3 buckets. First is consumer grade, so something that we buy ourselves. So exactly what you said, it can be our smart lighting at home, it can be Teslas if you can afford it.
I cannot.
There's also enterprise grade, which our employers would have purchased for our offices. So think of wireless printers and security cameras in our office. And then the last one is industrial grade, something that our city would install for us. So smart parking meters or the cameras in those streetlights if someone speeds.
Sounds like you're familiar with that.
I have a clean record. Okay.
Fantastic. So how do we get started?
Well, I'm a gamer. So I've created a game for us today. That's what's behind you. Yeah, very colorful. And you have the honor to test drive it.
I'm excited.
So how this will work is I'm going to share a few news stories with you. They're going to fall under each of those 3 categories I just mentioned. And each story corresponds to a sticky note that you have there. So after you hear a story, I want you to stick it on this board. And the colors on this board represents a spectrum of good to bad. Given that Wirefire is a B Corp, you know that all of our business decision always considers people, planet, and profit.
Pass the test.
So let's do the same for these news stories. If you find that the smart tech in the news story has a positive contribution to society, then you want to put the sticky note closer to the green end of the spectrum. If they have a more negative one, then you put it in the red end of the spectrum.
Okay.
No wrong answers, so go with how you feel. The point is just that I wanted to illustrate the complicated nature of smart tech in our daily lives, as in, depending on the context, it can range from life-saving to life-threatening. Best case scenario, you're gonna find this activity as fun and you learn something new today. And worst case scenario, you're gonna roll your eyes at me for the next 30 minutes. How's that sound?
That sounds fun. Let's do this.
Okay, we're gonna start with an industrial grade smart tech. Back in 2016, in the city of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, they lost electrical power for an hour. While 60 minutes doesn't really sound like a long time, that's like a lifetime for critical systems like an electrical power grid. So remember in IT, there's a security model and the abbreviation is CIA. What does that stand for?
Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, if I'm not mistaken.
Perfect. And it goes in that order,
Okay.
like priority-wise, right? But in OT, as in operational technology, availability comes first, followed by integrity, and then confidentiality. And so availability was exactly what the Indestroyer targeted, a malware that was specifically designed to target power grids. As most attacks goes, this particular one occurred in multiple stages. The first stage of the campaign was to exploit a known vulnerability in their Siemens Spirotech devices. And as far as I understand, these smart techs were supposed to protect the communication within the power grids to prevent service disruptions. A vulnerability was first reported a year before the attack, but they didn't patch. It was known to result in DOS disruption. So DOS stands for denial of service. Think of your network as a pipe. And DOS, to disrupt the service, is they flood it with requests, and so nothing can go through. And so you don't have internet, for example.
It's the hairball
Yes.
of the internet. I got you. All right.
That's exactly what these devices are supposed to prevent, but they had that vulnerability.
Okay.
Ironic, isn't it? Second stage of the campaign was the hacker simply waited for the scheduled time and date for the blackout to occur. And when the minute struck, the Indestroyer activated its payload and targeted 4 communication protocols. What's unique about this malware is that it's very modular. As long as one of the 4 communication protocols were active, then the attacks persisted and was able to amplify. And so in the third stage, the amplified attack was a DOS tool that rendered the protection relays unresponsive, and a wiper tool which targeted Microsoft Windows workstations that were used to administer, control, and configure protection relays. Finally, it crashed the system. That's the short and sweet version of that devastating incident. If you were to rate the contribution of or impact of the smart tech to society in this news story, where would you put it in the spectrum?
In any government, I would think that there are very few things that would be as disruptive as taking out an electrical grid. Other things that come to mind might be Ecom 911 or a water dam or traffic lights. So this one's really high up there for me. When I think about it from a people perspective, there's a couple of things that I'm thinking about. What does a power grid really support, right? So I think about critical services like healthcare, right? People that are in life support, folks that are in the middle of a surgery that blacked out might not be a great thing. In terms of planet and profit, well, that's an interesting one. Because power grids also support things like your dams, right? And regulating those dams, or regulating wastewater management treatment plants, right? What if there was a scenario where you could not control the toxins being leached out into the community? I think that could have a major environmental impact. And lastly, from a profit perspective, I'm not familiar with the way that electrical companies are structured in the Ukraine. But if you're looking at BC Hydro, for example, which is technically a nonprofit but funded by our tax dollars, it's certainly going to be impacting one of the revenue streams that the electrical company might have, which is to be able to charge for their product. And where does that come from? Well, unfortunately, it might come through back to us as the consumer eventually by coming through a different system, right? So for me, that is 3 red boxes. So I'm gonna put it right here. What's next, Ross?
All right. So this past Earth Day, April 22nd, the European Space Agency announced a 3-year-long project to develop government-grade IoT solutions to provide an effective natural disaster early warning system. It will be capable of monitoring a range of geohazards like floods and landslides. So Norway is actually piloting the program in an area that's highly susceptible to various types of geohazards. It's due to the topographic, geological, and hydrological conditions of that central region in Norway. A key smart tech of this project is Inmarsat's global L-band satellite network. Don't ask me to explain what that is. But in a nutshell, from what I understand, the smart tech in this story is going to be designed to collect geographic data that will be fed into a supercomputer that will potentially help prevent anyone from being harmed by natural disasters going forward.
From a people perspective, I can definitely see the positive impact of having a technology like this deployed. I don't hear any stories about collecting personal information, so that's a very positive sign. In terms of planet, we're not really stopping the floods or anything like that.
We can't.
We can't. So I'm going to put that as neutral. And from a profit perspective, I'm going to make that a green, because while we're not monetizing this necessarily, it is going to create jobs for people in the R&D of this technology.
That's right.
And it's also going to be able to give businesses an opportunity to respond to these threats, right? And enact their business continuity plans, protecting their profit. So for me, 2 greens and a yellow puts it right smack dab in green.
There we go. So the next news story is near and dear to Wirefire because I'm sure it will remind you of some of our clients. A quick
No names.
No names. A quick recap on what happened last February 5th in Florida. Hackers gained access to their water treatment facility by using a dormant remote access software and then tried to poison their water supply. But fortunately, one of their staff was able to thwart that attack. Imagine what the implications would be if a city's water cleaning and disinfection processes were shut down. Well, the citizens of Ellsworth, Kansas don't need to imagine because they had a close call themselves when a former employee of their water district remotely accessed their computer system back in 2019. Fortunately, a plant operator did notice the dangerous levels of sodium hydroxide in their water system, reversed the change. On the one hand, the Florida incident was made possible with 3 factors. One, they were still using Windows 7 operating system, which has been end of support since last January of 2020. They use the same passwords for all of their computers for remote access, and they don't have a firewall at all. On the other hand, the Kansas incident didn't even require a cyber hack because the problem there was the credentials of the former employee were just not revoked in a timely manner. Given what you just heard, how do you feel about critical infrastructures such as water treatment facilities going online?
Well, I think there was many reasons why a water treatment facility might need to go online. Given the pandemic right now, we're not able to access our offices as often as we should to keep people safe. So having remote access back into your environment is a critical thing for us to keep operations going right now. From that perspective, I think it's important. Keep in mind that these systems, right, they're also updated, in theory, by the vendors that actually produce them, right? So common ones would be GE, Schneider, Electric, whatever it may be. So there is going to be that necessity for these environments to be lit up.
Yeah.
Okay. But regardless, going back to the people, process, and technology, it sounds like these 2 situations ended up in the same result, but through different channels, right? The first one didn't have the technology in place.
Yeah.
Okay? That's one problem. Even if they did, would they have the processes, the people to manage it? Who knows?
Who knows?
Right? But in the second case,
It's like a poor offboarding process.
that's exactly it, right? So that is a poor offboarding process. And it's unclear to me where that actually resides, right? Is it IT? Maybe, right? Should they remove the password access and all that stuff? But IT doesn't necessarily own the responsibility for operational technology environments. So is it OT that's supposed to take away the credentials? Maybe.
Everyone's pointing fingers.
Right? Or, in this case, since it's an offboarding activity, should it have come from HR?
Yeah.
Right? So there's many ways to look at this. And for me, I'm going to put this in a yellow.
This is our final industrial story.
Okay.
But the story doesn't actually involve one smart tech, but it involves regulations towards smart tech.
Okay.
So the White House recently released a 100-day power grid cybersecurity plan. Its central strategy is to develop a stronger relationship between national security agencies and their electrical utility systems, which, did you know that in the US, the majority is private?
Yes, I actually did know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So the plan will be managed by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in collaboration with their Department of Energy. The primary goal of Biden's administration is to safeguard U.S. critical infrastructure from persistent cyber attacks. In order to achieve this, here are some examples from the initiative. So they will encourage owners and operators to implement measures or technology that enhance detection, mitigation, and forensic capabilities. This will include concrete milestones to quantify progress.
Well, that's good.
The second part, they will reinforce and enhance the cybersecurity posture of critical infrastructures for ICS, Industrial Control Systems, OT, which I actually mentioned earlier, but I didn't explain what it is. It's operational technology, and IT, so information technology, all the networks of those three, but the latter part is voluntary. So to be honest, the pessimistic side of me is not convinced. While it's a step to the right direction, I'm concerned with words like encourage and voluntary. I'd prefer to see enforce and mandatory. What about you?
I'm on the same page as you. Mm-hmm. Given that the real life impact that industrial technology can have on people, and unlike in IT where a data breach could result in a fine, a breach on the OT side could not only halt profitability, but actually can cause injury to people, your pets, whatever it may be.
It's a physical impact.
It is a physical, palpable impact, right? I would definitely agree with you that it should definitely be a little bit stronger in terms of what we expect our people to do.
So how would you rate that?
That's a tough one. I think I'm gonna go with a blend of yellow and red. That would make orange.
We're now stepping away from industrial grade smart tech to enterprise grade, and we'll start with a medical facility.
Oh, okay.
Yale New Haven Health in Connecticut was impacted when one of its outside vendors, Elekta, took its entire health system radiation machines offline in response to a cyber attack. But this resulted to cutting off cancer care for 200 critically ill patients statewide because the hospital lost cloud access. Their CEO, when asked, said, "We do not have the ability to operate the machines because the information that is programmed into those machines is up in the cloud." So as we speak, Elekta is still unsure what the timeline will be to restore their services and cannot provide an estimate. And we also can't rule out that PII, or personally identifiable information, has already been compromised. So given that Elekta is a software specifically designed for cancer, a life-threatening and time-sensitive condition, it's alarming to me that neither the hospital nor Elekta, the software company, has any nearline or coldline backups. What do you think?
I'm thinking that's a red.
That's
sorry. My sense is that clinicians need to start thinking of technology as a critical part of care delivery. Think about all the technologies that we engage with within the healthcare system. If you're in a surgery, that could be a Da Vinci machine where a doctor is around the world operating on you through robotic hands. Mm-hmm. That could be the MRI machine I just talked about earlier. That can be an infusion pump. And it's important for all these technologies to be secured, especially when you're talking about an oncology discipline, because we know that unfortunately, time is not on the side of the patient. No. battling cancer, right?
Yeah.
So based on that, I'm going to give it a poor score.
That's fair. I felt the same way. There are options for them to back up their information, and they chose not to. I don't know their reason, but options are available.
Absolutely. Okay.
Another enterprise smart tech is AI cameras. Hacked cameras, which live stream peoples who are unknowingly filmed while they engage in intimate activities, was not new when they flooded the news headlines back in 2019. But it was only when high-profile K-pop celebrities were sentenced to prison for consuming such content that the rest of the world took notice. In some incidents, cheap, tiny cameras were deliberately installed. On others, connected AI robot cameras like Tapia were found in hotels, motels, Airbnbs that were breached, so they were hacked and live streamed to paying audiences.
You know, I hate to say it, but cameras are literally everywhere we go, whether we are aware of it or not. And while I definitely think that the technology is really interesting, especially when you're thinking about it from a law enforcement perspective or a retail perspective, like the Amazon smart stores that we do not have in Canada, but we do see.
Oh, I've been to one in
You
Seattle.
have?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, so there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained for sure, but I do have to say that I am quite paranoid about all the cameras within my home. And they're not even just on a video game system where you might be familiar with it.
My Xbox.
Her Xbox. I'm thinking about my Peloton.
Oh, yeah.
My car has cameras everywhere.
And you're not necessarily, as a consumer, making that choice sometimes, right? Like maybe
No.
the security cameras, but the ones in your car, it's pre-installed.
Exactly. You know, for me, I'm going to be a little bit less harsh than I have been because I do see a positive use case here.
Moving on, I'm gonna warn you, this is my favorite story.
Okay.
So while I can't disclose the name of the casino for privacy reasons, I can tell you the details of how a hacker was able to exfiltrate data from their high rollers database through a thermometer. So
Gives me the chills.
the problem started with the smart fish tank. It was installed as an attraction in the casino's lobby for their guests. The technology enabled remote monitoring of temperature, salinity of the water, and automating the feedings of the fish. The casino configured a VPN to isolate the tank's data from the commercial network and figured they were now safe. But one day, the activity logs revealed that a large amount of data is currently being exported. At the time of this discovery, the tank had already sent 10 gigs of data to Finland using a transfer protocol typically used for audio and video. So personally, this is such an interesting case study because I've encountered many industries that assume that because they have one or the other, like an antivirus or a VPN, then they're good. But they have to think of it from a layered perspective, right? Because network is a layered approach. So they have to put in security measures in each of those layers.
You're talking about the Purdue model, aren't you?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so this is what that story is lacking for me. What do you think?
I'm actually really familiar with the story because the folks that helped out this casino was actually my old company.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I'm going to be sharing the same insight I did with the previous use case where, yes, City of Las Vegas has so many of these IoT devices monitoring different things. But what's missing for me here is exactly what you're talking about, the Purdue model, which is why have these organizations not thought about segmenting their networks securely to prevent this type of activity going on, right? You know, I've seen a lot of organizations where IT does its own thing, very secure. They think about the CIA, right? So that's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But it's not the IT folks that are in charge of these fish tanks, is it? Right?
No.
And it's the people that are installing these into the fish tanks are probably thinking about, I just need this thing to work.
You hit
right?
such a good point there because the fact that they use a VPN, that means they had good intentions. They actually thought
There you
about
go.
it ahead,
Yeah.
but the execution was poor. All right, it's too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way I pictured it was like you build a 10-feet wall around your castle to protect it, but then you learn the hard way that your enemy can fly.
Oh, there's a good one.
Next story.
Okay.
So 2 years ago, back in Oslo, the capital of Norway, Halvor Moland was awakened by his phone ringing at 3 in the morning. It's never a good call.
No.
The call was to inform the vice president of Norsk Hydro, so Moland, that their global aluminum production has been seized by a crippling ransomware infection that spread through the company's networks. His initial thought was to shut down the network entirely, but there was nothing left to isolate anymore. So as a result, the company lost $110 million.
Okay.
The story is in no way outstanding, but Moland and his team did something unusual that makes him an outlier among the many ransomware victims. They chipped away at the stigma around publicly discussing cybersecurity incidents and told the public what happened in vivid detail. Norway's government expressed that Norsk Hydro's willingness to share details of the breach has helped other companies block similar hacking incidents. Despite this, many ransomware victims across different sectors still remain reluctant to discuss their experiences for fear of tarnishing their reputation.
Yeah.
So if you were in the vice president's shoes, how would you handle a ransomware attack?
Rossilyne, you posted on our LinkedIn a while back where some countries are now holding executives personally accountable for any sort of breaches.
It's
due to
being
negligence,
proposed, so
right?
it may be effective by like 2025.
Exploring. My
Yeah.
apologies. The onus is now fully on the executives of these organizations. Within any sort of ransomware attack or any sort of cybersecurity incident, I think it's really important to keep a cool head. You'll hear our CTO Alon talk about that a lot. You don't want to trigger the threat actor any more than they are already triggered. I do think that the approach was correct. I always feel like it's not a matter of if you're going to get attacked, it's probably when. So if we remove the stigma on ourselves and start building a community of, well, this happened to me, so I'm going to share it with you so it doesn't happen to you, I think that's a really nice move. From a people's perspective, I would rate it really quite high with green because I actually do think it's going to be a great learning for everybody.
Okay, so that was the last enterprise grade. We're now moving on to consumer grade, so into our homes.
Okay.
Back in 2019, a couple from Wisconsin reported that a hacker tapped into their Google Home device and cranked up their heat, talked to them while looking through their camera, and played vulgar music.
Okay.
Google responded by saying that the device itself was not hacked, but the users failed to use MFA or multi-factor authentication to protect their credentials. More disturbingly, during the same year, a chilling exchange was caught on camera between a hacker and Elisa, an 8-year-old girl in Mississippi. Elisa's mother installed Amazon's Ring camera in her bedroom for peace of mind, but it resulted to a strange man talking to Elisa while watching her through the camera. Over several minutes, the man repeatedly directed a racial slur at her and tried to persuade her to misbehave. When asked to comment, Amazon had a similar response to Google, saying that it's the shortcoming of the victims that they often reuse credentials that may have already been compromised from other services. It sounds like the manufacturers are pushing all the responsibility towards the consumers. Does that seem fair to you?
I don't know what fair would look like in this context, to be perfectly honest, but I do think that the more that consumers empower themselves, and myself included, the better off we will be. I think it's really important for us as consumers to educate ourselves on the power of changing your password.
Yes, and
Right.
using MFA.
And using your MFA. You know, internet's not a new thing. We all know to change the passwords on our router. So why are we not adapting that learning as we continue to light up our homes with different smart technologies?
We lack awareness.
We lack awareness and education. So back to my original point, there's no shortage of information out there, right? BSides is a really fantastic source, or ISACA, where we're both associate directors.
Yes.
Very good resource for learning about our responsibility in protecting our PII. PII, I should say. I'm struggling with this one a little bit. I'm going to put it in yellow.
Okay. Next, smart tech. So Mark Fellows is a hitman in the UK, currently serving life imprisonment, and was convicted because evidence gathered from his watch revealed that he was conducting reconnaissance runs near his victim's house less than 2 months before the incident. Upon further investigation, the Manchester police used this data as evidence to show the escape route Fellows had taken after gunning down his victim in his own driveway.
Okay.
So on the one hand, I'm glad that the criminal's own smartwatch helped solve the crime, but on the other hand, I feel uneasy with the thought that my Fitbit could potentially be used against me. Like, there's already insurance companies like John Hancock in the US that incentivizes their members to wear smartwatches in exchange for their data. What would stop these companies from using that data to raise premiums or refuse to insure someone altogether, right? So for you, like smartwatches in general, how do you feel about them?
I don't have a smartwatch. But it's not because of this reason. It's because I generally prefer not to be pinged on 5 different devices every single day. But my mom does have one. And the reason she does is because she tracks her heart rate, tracks her activity level, and also she considers it a bit of a lifeline because she lives alone, and for security reasons she likes to have access to a way of communicating with family members if anything should happen. So for her, very good. But keeping in mind, it does store a lot of your personal data, right?
It knows way too much about you.
It knows way, way, way too much about you.
So I'm hearing yellow.
You are hearing. I'm gonna put it like yellow-green.
Next story. It may seem outrageous for individuals like us who live in Canada to learn that there are countries that categorizes the following as crimes punishable by imprisonment: being homosexual and owning intimate lifestyle products. So such was the case of an incident in Malaysia where the location of a smart adult toy was used to track and convict a same-sex couple for living their lives. So if you remember a few months back, this was the first and only story I pitched to you when we decided to do this presentation.
That's right.
And I'm humbled by how much faith you had in me for letting me continue my research without knowing what kind of scandalous stories I would tell her today. But seriously, I'm curious to learn your thoughts on this because personally, I see the pros of connecting such devices to the internet. Hear me out. Its remote features come in handy amidst this pandemic. Think about that.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if the pros outweigh the cons. So what about you? How do you feel about it?
I'm going to be perfectly honest. This is not a world I'm very familiar with. But I'm glad you did the research on a Wirefire laptop. So I consider myself a bit of an advocate for diversity. In my volunteer life with ISACA, I actually am the Associate Director for She Leads Tech, and we're highly inclusive of all genders and all sexual orientations. At Wirefire, we also encourage and actually mandate ourselves to hire based on diverse principles, right? So it is really sad for me to see that some countries can still punish someone for homosexuality by throwing them in jail or worse. So I'll say that first. I think especially in these pandemic times, there is a lack of intimacy, connection. And this technology is clearly fulfilling a gap, right? Physical, emotional, whatever it may be. I recognize that this is an innate human desire to have. And how individuals seek that out is entirely their business. And I believe that if you're not hurting anybody, do what you like, right?
Live your life.
Live your life. For me, though, and I don't know where to put my red against, it won't be the technology, but it will be the government. Because I feel like this is very unethical use of technology that it's not intended for this purpose.
Exactly.
Right? And when we get into surveillance of people in their own homes, and unfortunately, depending on where you live in the world, right now, it may not be acceptable. In Canada, it certainly isn't, and that's our privilege to recognize. But in other parts of the world, it is acceptable. And it's a really tough question to answer.
I hear you. I mean,
Right.
I'm from Asia as well, right?
Me too.
So I didn't migrate here till I was 18. So I have lived quite like 2 lives of a country that's very conservative and a country that's liberal.
Right.
So yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I can see why you would put it in red.
Absolutely. Without trying to cast judgment on how people govern, how people live their lives, or how
Yeah.
to use information, I'm going to go with gut. And my gut is telling me that's a red.
All right. So the last story is a little bit something that we touched on earlier already, because you
Okay.
mentioned something about your mom, but I'll tell it anyway. So
Okay.
Bob March is a 58-year-old man who received an Apple Watch as an anniversary present. And once he started using it, he noticed erratic heart readings with highs as much as 127 beats per minute and lows in 60s. On getting checked from a practitioner, he was diagnosed with arrhythmia, a condition where people suffered irregular heartbeats, causing his heart to work in overdrive. Soon, Bob had to go through surgery, and now he's doing fine and goes for daily runs with his puppy. So, Apple is not a B Corp, but their Apple Watch got me curious if it serves people, planet, and profit. So, according to their self-published environmental report, apparently it does. It's very, like, it used recycled materials, it has minimal packaging and all that. But are you sold? Like, I know your mom has a watch, you don't. So if we revisit this based on this story, I mean, where would you rate Apple Watches?
I look at it from the people, profit, and planet perspective. People first. I'm going to say yes, right? Clearly, this gentleman would be in a much worse position had he not picked up that he may have potentially arrhythmia. And I believe that by having this beautiful gift from, I assume, his wife, if it's an anniversary gift, it potentially prolonged his life with her. So I think that's a wonderful thing. From a planet perspective, you know, maybe that's true, and I applaud the effort, but we also have to consider the supply chain, right? What does your carbon footprint look like if your product is designed in California but made in China?
Yes.
And what about the minerals involved, right? There are many instances where there's conflict materials being used in our technologies. Does Apple avoid those, right? So we have to really consider the full supply chain and profit. Well, I don't
They
know,
make
it's
a lot of
Apple.
profit.
Yeah.
I think they're doing well.
I think people are doing well at Apple. So let's take a look. I'm going to put this in yellow-green just because of the question mark around the planet component.
Cool. So, in my research, it seemed that people's attitudes towards smart tech fell under one of these 3 categories. You're either a person who actively avoid buying these things because you really want to protect your data. You're an individual who dislikes the idea that Google can predict when's your next menstrual cycle and knows when to target you with tampon ads. But as long as there's some sort of benefit, they reluctantly use the product still. So that's me.
Yeah.
And then the third is just individuals who don't see any problem with it. After doing this activity, did this impact you in any way of how you think about smart tech?
You know, I think about smart tech a lot, given what we do at Wirefire. So I think what it's made me aware in this process is that I'm willing to give quite a bit of my privacy for the benefit that technology brings to me. I think I said earlier that, you know, I wish I was always a responsible netizen. I was not, right? In 1995, when we had dial-up, there was none of this.
Yeah, I talked to strangers through ICQ, like
ICQ, MySpace,
AOL.
whatever it was, right? So for somebody like me, you know, the world knows as much about me as I do, maybe even more. So given that, it's less important for me to really be safeguarding my data. And what I really love about people having access to it is that I get things that are pushed to me that I actually enjoy. Instagram, for example. It knows exactly what I like.
Netflix suggestions,
music suggestions. So I'm constantly surrounded by things that I really enjoy. What was really interesting was how much I'd be willing to give up for the sake of
convenience.
Yeah. Right? And I don't think I'm alone in that.
No. And I hope viewers don't walk away from this session feeling like I'm against smart tech. I mean, I have a Fitbit, I have smart lights at home, I own a smartphone, but I find smart technologies awesome, but I don't find them completely awesome. If applied correctly, I think smart tech can help drive smarter, more efficient operating environments for manufacturing plants, utility providers, power stations, and more. Like predictive maintenance alone could help vast amounts of outgoing costs, while also helping critical infrastructure run smoothly. But what do we frequently hear from our clients? They struggle to find their gaps because they don't even have visibility of what their gaps are.
Right.
And second, when we finally help them gain visibility, they're overwhelmed with the amount of things that they need to address. And then third, they're understaffed and already struggling to keep their heads above water. Cybersecurity gets neglected. And unfortunately, buying the latest and greatest security tools doesn't automatically solve their problems.
Yeah.
So all of these concerns are fair, but we gotta start somewhere. And in my opinion, cybersecurity awareness is one of the cheapest and most accessible places to start. What do you think about that?
I don't believe that people should fall into the victim mentality because it suggests that you're not empowered to resolve it, right?
Yeah, and the way I see it is that we're always on our smartphones anyway, so why not incorporate some cybersecurity news into our media diet from time to time? If you don't like reading, we have friends from Cybersecurity Matters podcast, can just listen to those, right? And they give really good insights. It's impossible to dictate what is available in the market as well for us to consume, right? And we can only hope that manufacturers will incorporate security into their designs, or that city officials will properly vet smart technologies that they deploy in our cities. Despite not having the choice all the time because our employers or cities have already chosen to be smart on our behalf, the best we can do as consumers is to take the initiative to educate ourselves so we know what to look out for.
That's awesome, Ross.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you learned something new today.